Hello everyone, I am Mushahid Hussain from Islamabad and I am delighted to present to you this new show, Global South Voice, on behalf of CGTN, China's premier television channel for the world. And we have this program specially catering to providing a perspective to our viewers based on lenses from the global south, which is actually the world's majority. As we speak, we are witnessing an epoch of turbulence and transformation, which is affecting the global economy, which is affecting global security, which is affecting global diplomacy as well as interstate relationships. President Xi Jinping has rightly termed this epoch as a period in which we are witnessing once in a century changes. In 2024, as we speak, China will have its two sessions, which will set a new pattern for policies, for deliberations on various national and international issues. The Global South feels the future is inextricably intertwined with the quest for connectivity, with the quest for cooperation, where globalization, in which China is spearheading 30% of global growth, that is the way forward. And an important element in 2024 is also a question mark, which is about the most important relationship in the world today, the relationship between China and the United States, and which way that relationship will take. Some people feel there is a consensus in the United States on seeing China as the new enemy in a new Cold War. Other more saner voices talk of cooperation, that there should be a normal competitive relationship between the world's two largest economies, because China is today the world's second largest economy. And in this show, we will be focusing on all these issues, apart from climate change, poverty alleviation, security issues, and emerging interstate relationships. As China holds its two sessions, the spotlight is on the world's second largest economy. And we'll start this show with the presence of three distinguished gentlemen who have expertise and experience in their respective fields and who have had a close study and interaction with China and the world. With us in the studio today in Islamabad is the very eminent Pakistan former minister and former governor, State Bank, an economist who also worked in the World Bank, a writer, Dr. Ishrat Hussain. A warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
And we have with us, joining us from neighboring India, which is a neighbor of both Pakistan and China, the very eminent public intellectual of India, Mr. Sudheendra Kulkarni, who served as a close aide of Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And I remember welcoming him in Pakistan on the famous bus journey in 1999 when he came with Prime Minister Vajpayee, and I was then Minister for Information and Culture. And he's also the founder of the Forum for an Inclusive South Asia, which includes Pakistan, India and China, and their collaboration for a better tomorrow. And in Beijing, we are joined by a leading expert on Pakistan, and we are joined by Professor Li Xiguang, who is from Tsinghua University and who has been focusing on cultural, academic and intellectual issues. He's also a former journalist. He served as the bureau chief of Tsinghua in Washington, D.C., and now he's based in Beijing. Starting with Dr. Ishrat Hussain, how do you view the interaction between China's economy with the rest of the world, especially Pakistan? Because we have had this interaction with China over the last several decades. And especially in the last 10 years, we have seen this trademark project of the Belt and Road Initiative, CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And despite the demonization by the West about China, let's see what the experience of Pakistan has been as a key member of the global South with China on the economic issues.
China took quite a few decades in order to reach a situation where they became the world's second largest economy and the world's largest exporting nation. And this is unparalleled in human history, that a country which 1980 had $100 per capita income was able to reach $12,500 in almost 3 decades. This is not something which any historian of economic development would able to find a parallel. It took United States 100 years to reach that situation. It took Japan 50 years, it took Korea most than 40 years, but United States record, China's record are very different track. Having attained that position, China felt that it is also very much responsible to help the developing countries of the world. And I can tell you from my own experience, having worked on China as a chief economist for World Bank and chief economist for Africa, I can make the contrast. The World Bank, the Western powers were always coming in with their own projects, which they felt made sense for those countries.
So they were telling the countries what
that
to do.
is what you should borrow for. And these were loans, these were not grants. Of course, the Scandinavian countries, Netherlands and Canada were very generous as far as the grants were concerned, but the rest of the Western world gave them the loans. And they took a lot of time in order to complete these projects and negotiate these projects. China, on the other hand, went to these countries and said, what is your priority needs for economic growth and development? And they responded to the local needs and demands and did not impose any of their own priors or of their own discretionary powers. And they said, this is what you want. You want a railway line, you want a highway, you want a sports stadium, whatever you need, we will cater to that. And that is a major difference as far as the popularity of China in Africa and other South Asia.
So the choice is given to the recipient countries, not imposed
by
from Washington
outside.
DC. That is a very important
important point, and people don't realize that.
That's, I think, a very key
as
element.
As you said, in demonizing China, the popular myth in the West is that China is creating debt trap for these developing countries. Yes. The facts are quite contrary to that.
In fact, I was recently reading an article in the Atlantic, which is published in Washington, D.C. by 2 American professors, Harvard and Yale, and they wrote an article, The Myth of the Chinese Debt Trap. So, you know, even they are focusing on, I think, let's learn from the Chinese famous dictum.
I wrote this 5 years.
Seek truth from facts.
I wrote this 5 years ago, and then I was at Atlantic Council in Washington, where there was a webinar. And some of my Indian friends, you know, phoned me back and said, Ishrat, we didn't know all these facts which you have disclosed about the Chinese assistance to the developing countries, and also particularly CPEC.
Thank you. And I think we'll move to Sudheendra Kulkarni Saab in Delhi, taking on from Dr. Ishrat Hussain's, and I think it's based on the famous Chinese dictum, popularly claimed, seek truth from facts. You have been visiting China frequently, and you have been focusing on agriculture, on poverty alleviation, and the world, the way it presents, especially the Western media, China's economic growth, and say there's a slowdown, there's a problem, there's a imminent crisis coming up. What are the facts on that based on your recent research and visits, Mr. Kulkarni?
First of all, I want to congratulate you on starting this new program, Voice of the Global South. It is most timely because the Global South accounts for the majority of the global population. But the media and the voice of the Global South still does not match the influence of the West. We are all aware that the West accounts only for 15% of the global population, but it dominates the media, it dominates the intellectual discourse in a disproportionate way. And which is why all the media voices of the developing countries, China, India, Pakistan, Africa, Latin America, other countries in Asia, we all should strengthen our media voices both separately and collectively so that we end the domination of the West in setting the debate for global development, global future. Now, coming to your question, Mushahid Saab, China has shown that it can grow very fast and at the same time solve critical issues, problems inherited from the past. And I especially refer to its success in eliminating extreme poverty. Today, there is no extreme poverty at all in China. 800 million people lifted out of poverty in 4 decades is yet another feat unparalleled by any other country in history. So other countries in Global South, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all of us included, we have a lot of lessons to learn from China in the way it has eliminated poverty and improved the living conditions of people, not only in urban areas, but also in rural areas. In recent months, I've been fortunate to travel extensively in rural China, and I've seen for myself China's success in rural revitalization, in rural industrialization. So, on the one hand, as has been pointed out, China is marching forward in high-tech areas, electric vehicles, semiconductors, robotics, artificial intelligence, etc. But at the same time, it is also taking care of the basic needs of its vast masses. So, therefore, China is in many ways a model for the rest of the Global South. But I want to underscore one point. It's not only China. Every country in the Global South brings its own strengths. India, for example, is soon going to be the 3rd largest economy in the world. India is demographically number 1 in the world. It has overtaken China in population. And in infrastructure, India is doing very, very well. So the time has come when all of us have to pool in our experiences, our successes, help each other, and most importantly, we should end our bilateral differences and disputes, whether they are between India and China or India and Pakistan.
Well put. And I think that's very important that we are seeing an inexorable shift globally in the balance of economic and political power away from the West to the Global South. And I think that this is also focused on the rise of China, the resurgence of other countries like India. I would now like to move on to Professor Li Xiguang in Beijing. We talk of China's economy, we talk of China's growth, but there's also China is the oldest continuing civilization of the last 5,000 years, and we have Chinese wisdom in a lot of areas. And this wisdom has been manifested in how they brought together 2 countries that were at loggerheads for last 30, 40 years in the Middle East, Iran and Saudi Arabia, and served as a bridge between the two and normalized their relations. And we were very happy to note that during the meeting of the UN Security Council on the war in Gaza, while the US vetoed the resolution for a ceasefire, China was spearheading the quest for peace in the Middle East and focused on a ceasefire. And in fact, the Chinese ambassador very aptly put it in the UN Security Council that the US veto is a green light for continuing the slaughter in Palestine. So given that context, Professor Li Xiguang, how can Chinese wisdom, China's rise as be an opportunity for bringing countries and cultures together?
Congratulations to you for hosting the Voice of Global South with China's global TV CGTN. It's a landmark in global media change of landscape. And what is Global South? How we define it? China's idea of looking at the South. South doesn't mean it has to be in South Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. And most part of China are in Northern Asia. So South means that it's a new civilization, or this new, it's a return to the past civilization or tradition. And this means that the shared future of human community should be a future of different value system, or a shared future with different value system. That is shared future, which means that if you agree with that, we don't have to build a society, a new world shared the same value. We build a world which every country agree to have its own value system. That is the human community of shared future or of common destiny. So Chinese modernity doesn't mean that the other country follow China modernity, that means follow Chinese culture, speaking Chinese language, or using Chinese value system to make their own measurement. No, that means every country build its own country with its own cultural root, with its own tradition, its religious belief, and its political system, and its own ideology, not shared ideology. So all the chaos all started with this narrow-mindedness of the building a camp of shared ideology. But we, Global South, want to build a future world with a variety of value system, a variety of ideology.
Thank you, Professor Li Xiguang, and I think you summed it up very well, the philosophy of President Xi Jinping in the Global Civilization Initiative, which follows on the earlier Global Security Initiative and the Global Development Initiative, because all of these talk of an inclusive approach based on respect for each other's sovereignty and separate path of development, but in a shared destiny. In this context, we were talking about China's economy and the growth, and you were focusing also, how do you see China's economic statecraft vis-a-vis Pakistan specifically on the issue of CPEC? Because that is also a good example for this Global South, and that's a success story.
The United States is now saying America first, everything within the borders of the American territory. We don't want to do trade. We don't want to have the Chinese goods coming in. We want to have a ban on the export of technology. We don't want the Chinese companies to come in. I mean, this is the new economic order which is going to really hurt the Global South. And the only power which is really helping the both in advocacy as well as assistance is China. And therefore, we must all in the Global South try to strengthen the hands of China in the forums like the G20 and other forums where the interests of Global South are protected.
That's a very important point made by Dr. Ishrat Hussain, that the countries, especially like the United States, which were spearheading globalization, which talked of free trade, which talked of open borders, and which said there should be no tariffs. And now suddenly there's a role reversal, and we see double standards. They are the ones imposing tariffs on China, on other countries as penalties. They are the ones who are opposing globalization. And I remember that famous speech of President Xi Jinping in Davos in January 2017, where he said that those who oppose globalization, it's being like locked up in a dark room. Because now the world has been transformed.
And today, with the grace of God, we have 10,000 megawatts installed as a new capacity under CPAC. $27 billion have already been spent. There are 6 projects which are hydro projects which take much more time, and they will be completed in the next few years. And Pakistan today has a surplus energy rather than the shortages. So he was responding to our priorities and to our needs. Similarly, the 3 highways, the western route, the eastern route, and the central route, were connecting Gwadar with Kashgar. So when people say, well, it is a China's secret mission in order to extract resources from the other countries, I say, look, is China taking away our electricity from Pakistan to them? Is they taking away our highways, which are helping our truckers to reduce their timing from 12 hours to 6 hours? And then they are constructing the Gwadar port. And the Gwadar port has been in offing for such a long time, but it's only the Chinese who have completed all the work on the port, and it now requires connectivity to the hinterland. And as soon as the western route takes place, which in a few years' time, I think Gwadar will take over as one of the very busy seaports. And finally, I would say that the new airport in Gwadar is state of the art. It is almost to be opened up. They have also created desalination of water, which will help the people of Gwadar. So the bottom line I wanted to emphasize that China actually has helped in the prioritization of Pakistan's economic growth and development. It is not their agenda, it is our agenda which they have financed under CPAC.
That's what they call win-win cooperation. And I think this success story, which you very graphically analyzed and explained with facts, shows that how CPAC, which has been the flagship of the Belt and Road Initiative, has been so successful. Just like the railway in Laos, or the Bandung Jakarta railway, or the Mombasa railway with Nairobi, and so different parts of the world. And interestingly, while the West criticizes the BRI based on false assumptions, they also have copycat projects. B3W, Build Back Better, the world. Then they have PGII, they call it, Program for Global Infrastructure and Investment. Then they talk of Global Gateway. But none of these copycat projects have taken off, while China's BRI in the last 10 years has invested over $1 trillion in 3,000 projects in different parts of the world. Thank you for that information, Dr. Ishrat Hussain. I come to Sudheendra Kulkarni Saab now, that given this context and given this nature of US-China relations at this current level where there is so much fake news demonization, what do you see as something hopeful for tomorrow, better tomorrow for the relationship? Because this relationship is extremely important to stabilize the global economic and political order, China-US relationship. And what are the impediments and what needs to be done to take it forward?
You're absolutely right that stable China-US relations are important not only for the two countries themselves, but for the world as a whole. Because the two are the largest and the second largest economies. Of course, in a short time, China will overtake America. Nobody can stop that. The two are also major military powers, and therefore it is necessary for world peace, for world development, that China and the United States arrive at a mechanism whereby they can manage their relations in a stable, predictable, and smooth manner. China wants it, but the United States is most certainly at a quandary. It says something, does something else, and the contrast between China and the West as a whole is now becoming clearer and clearer. Let me give an example. Munich Security Conference. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi made a very telling comment. He said that China has never invaded another country and China does not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. Now contrast this with what the United States has been doing. Whether it's Ukraine, Israel's barbaric war on Palestinians in Gaza, or elsewhere, there has not been a single year after the end of the Second World War when the United States has not been at war in some part of the world or the other. And this contrast is something that the Global South is seeing. And as a result, America's appeal and attraction for the Global South is decreasing.
I think that's a very important point, Mr. Kulkarni, that even the countries within the Global South have to resolve all their issues peacefully through dialogue. So that's what China's worldview and values are all about. And that is what separates China from the West, which has a very colonial and imperial past. So coming to Professor Li Xiguang, you also lived in Washington, D.C. as a journalist, and we see new challenges emerging. As a media also, we have been discussing how Global South countries are demonized, how there are double standards, and there's a yawning chasm between what is said about human rights, about free speech, and about democracy. But when it comes to issues of human rights, like what's happening to the Palestinians in Gaza or other areas, they turn a blind eye, they have double standards, or then either they use it as a weapon against countries like China and other countries also.
About the demonization of China, there is also a history of demonization of the whole South. And the South world has been fighting, particularly the intellectuals of the South, has been fighting against or demonizing of the Western media, but we fail. The root comes from the mentality or the mind and heart of the Southern media manager, owner, and the journalist, or the Southern intellectual world. And the Western elite has been, it seems that they have no more the physical world of being the slave owner, but they continue being the slave owner of South mind and heart. So they are the master of setting agenda for the South, for the key international conflict agenda.
So I think that those two contrasting visions are there, and for the Global South, the paramount focus is on connectivity, on globalization, on economic development. I would say that the Global South voice, this flagship program, the maiden program of CGTN, would be reflecting those sentiments, looking at the world through the lenses of the Global South. And I would like to really thank our distinguished guests for the first show, Dr. Ishrat Hussain from Pakistan, Mr. Sudheendra Kulkarni from India, and Professor Li Xiguang from China, for participating in what has been a very fruitful, informative, and intellectually stimulating discourse on the way forward for Global South in 2024, as China has these two sessions which will discuss and deliberate important national and international issues in Beijing. Thank you.